Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Varun Agarwal, I welcome you all on behalf of WWF-India and CDP India to this webinar on Scope 3 target setting methodology under the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Just to give you a brief background, this is the third webinar in the series of webinars that we are hosting under the Science-Based Targets Incubator program that is a joint collaboration between WWF India and CDP India, an initiative funded by the Shakti Foundation here in India. Under the incubator, we are working on enhancing the uptake of the Science-Based Targets Initiative in India by recruiting more and more businesses and also helping them in the process of setting the GHG emission reduction targets, which are in line with the latest climate science. For today's webinar, we have two distinguished panelists amongst us. So we have Mr. Alexander Farsan, who's the global lead for the Science-Based Targets Initiative at WWF International. He would be talking about the Scope 3 target setting methodology under the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And we also have Mr. Anand Marathe, who's the Deputy General Manager in Mahindra and Mahindra Group, and he leads the sustainability program there and works on various aspects of sustainability, and particularly also looks after the science-based targets initiative that the Mahindra Group has spearheaded here in India, with almost all the Mahindra Group companies who signed up for the initiative and many with their got their targets validated as well. So Mr. Marathe would be talking about the journey of the Mahindra Group on the path of science-based target setting, and also about the achievements and the various other aspects. So without much ado, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Alexander Farsan, who would be talking about the Scope 3 targets under the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Over to you, Alex. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Varun, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words today about Scope 3 targets and how they work under the SBTI. So I'll speak a little bit about the different target options that companies have under the SBTI to address their Scope 3 targets, and we'll also address specifically the criteria that we have around Scope 3 targets. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how companies should perhaps start thinking about their Scope 3 targets and measuring their Scope 3 emissions, because we fully appreciate that this is one of the areas that can be quite challenging for companies because it's still quite new as a practice in sort of corporate sustainability circles. And then I'm very happy to take any questions during the Q&A towards the end of the hour. So to start us off, and many of you will be very familiar with this graph, but I think it's important to reiterate just to make sure that everybody on the call has a clear understanding. This is a graph from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the perhaps most prominent corporate, and it explains what this idea of Scope 3 emissions even is. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol sorts emissions that companies have in their value chain into three principles. And perhaps the most easy parallel here is to think about your own household. So the Scope 1 emissions are the most direct emissions that your business is responsible for. So directly emitting from your operations. This means emissions from fossil fuels that are burned within your operations. There's also potentially process emissions if you have manufacturing processes that emit CO2 or other greenhouse gases. And it can also come from fossil fuels, for example, you would burn in your vehicle. If you translate that level, if your own household, it would, for example, be gas that you cook with, fuel that if you own a car or a two-wheeler, that you fuel your car or two-wheeler with. So those are the most immediate emissions in your operations. Scope 2 emissions are emissions from electricity or other energy that you purchase, which is not directly generated within your operations. So typically it tends to be electricity, but it can also be steam or district heating. And again, translating this to your household, I think the easiest, this is perhaps very easy because it is the electricity that you purchase and consume in electric appliances, etc., etc. And then going beyond these direct operations of yours, there's this entire world of Scope 3 emissions, which are 15 categories that these Scope 3 emissions are sorted into 15 different categories. And they account for all the emissions that happen in your supply chain upstream, so emissions from the raw materials you purchase, from the processing of those raw materials, from the raw materials to your factories or your operations, associated with business travel, employee commuting, and then also all the downstream impact of the products that you sell while they're being used, their end of life. And then there's also a number of other categories around, again, the transport downstream as well as investments. And this can seem a little bit overwhelming, but again, if you translate it down to your household, it's essentially the impact from all the goods you buy. So if you buy a TV or the food you buy, or if you go on holiday and you take a flight or even a train, that will be associated with emissions and associated with your activities and consumption. And that's the emissions that you would account in scope. Historically, companies have primarily set targets for the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and it still very much is a big part of the SBTI. But what has emerged over the last years as a very important practice is that companies also take responsibility for the emissions that they indirectly cause in their supply chain, as well as the emissions from their products. And today, we're going to speak about how the SBTI sees these scope 3 targets, what are the requirements around them, and how can companies go about setting them. So first, we start with an overview of the SBTI scope 3 criteria. And these are part of a larger document called the SBTI criteria and recommendations, which is really the list of rules, if you want, that the SBTI validates the company's target against if they submit the target to the SBTI. The key first step for a company is understanding whether they require a scope 3 target. And the SBTI has a materiality threshold for this of 40% of emissions, of its total emissions. So if scope 3 emissions account for more than 40% of the combined scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, then a company must set a scope 3 target because the emissions are considered material. How does a company find out whether or not they have emissions that are larger than 40%? By conducting what's called a scope 3 screening. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later, but essentially a high-level estimate is a core requirement, a high-level estimate of how large the scope 3 footprint is, and only if it's larger than 4%, does the SBTI require you to set the target. Again, we'll speak a little bit more about this step later, but this is the first step, trying to understand how large are your scope 3 emissions and are they material? Do I need to set a target? Once you understand that you do need to set a target, the SBTI again has a certain materiality threshold of 2/3 of your scope 3 emissions. So once you've understood how large your scope 3 footprint is, and you need to set a target, the SBTI expects you to set one or multiple targets that cover at least 2/3 of those emissions. Scope 3 targets are typically 5 to 15-year targets in the future, and that is in line with the general target requirements of the SBTI. And for the ambition, I'm going to speak about in a moment, there's 3 different options that you have. So essentially, there's 3 different options for emission reduction targets. And then we also have an option of setting supplier or customer engagement targets. And I'll explain all of these in more detail now. So the emission reduction targets, as I mentioned, have 3 different options, 5 to 15-year targets. And there's 3 different yardsticks that we let companies choose from, whichever fits their type of footprint, their scope 3 value chain, but also their strategy best. The first one is absolute emission reduction targets, consistent with keeping temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. For those of you that will be familiar with the SBTI framework a little bit more in depth, you will perhaps notice that this is a little bit less ambitious than the minimum ambition for Scope 1 and 2 targets. So for Scope 1 and 2 targets, the minimum ambition is well below 2C, and the encouragement is actually to set targets in line with 1.5. The minimum ambition for Scope 3 is below 2 degrees Celsius, and that essentially is a function of Scope 3 target setting practice being less mature, and it's being quite challenging for companies in some instances to reduce Scope 3 emissions. So the minimum ambition here is a little bit lower. However, of course, we do encourage companies to take that extra step and to go further to reduce emissions. There's also intensity targets that are consistent with keeping temperature increase below 2C. And companies can either use our SDA method for physical intensity for this. So to give you an example, if a company purchases a lot of steel, we do have a specific pathway for the decrease time, so they could use those pathways to set targets for the emissions from steel. Or they can choose an economic intensity target. And that means the intensity of carbon per unit of value produced. And there the minimum threshold is 7%. And then finally, we also allow other emission reduction targets that, first of all, do not result in absolute emission growth. So there's a hard cap basically in terms of letting emissions grow, and lead to an annual 2% linear physical intensity reduction. So the challenge here can be that perhaps companies might not have a good physical intensity indicator, but generally speaking, the idea is that companies can reduce the intensity of the Scope 3 intensity of their business, and without a clear requirement to reduce absolute emissions, except for this cap on absolute emission growth. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail again. So the absolute reduction targets consistent with keeping temperature increase below 2C means that all companies must reduce their absolute emissions by 49% by 2050 from 2010 levels. This is the old minimum threshold that the SBTi at its very beginning in 2015 applied to all targets. And that translates on a linear level to 1.23% per year. So if you, for example, would reduce targets over 10, if you reduce emissions over 10 years, you have a 10-year target. That means you multiply 1.23 times 10. So the minimum ambition would be 12.3%. But of course, often companies do go further because they understand that that's what's needed to really hit the more ambitious goals in the Paris Agreement. And here's some examples of companies that have chosen to set a targets like this. So Levi Strauss, for example, which I think many of you will be familiar with, one of the most known jeans brands in the world, has pledged to reduce its absolute Scope 3 emissions from all purchased goods and services, so that's the upstream emissions from its suppliers, by 40% by 2025. So they take the absolute footprint from those categories and pledge to reduce them by 40%. Similarly, Asahi Group Holdings, a beverage and beer manufacturer in Japan, have committed to reduce their absolute Scope 3 emissions by 30% by 2030, and have even made a commitment to reach net zero or zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And we do encourage these long-term 2050 ambitious targets, but they must be supported by these 5 to 15-year science-based targets. The second type of target that I had briefly talked about is intensity targets, and those intensity targets that are consistent with below 2 degrees Celsius. And just the examples that companies haven't chosen this approach. Most prominent, for example, a large fashion house, Gucci, have committed to reducing their Scope 3 emissions from purchased goods and services per value added, so the economic intensity, by 40% over 10 years. Similarly, Microsoft, who I believe most of you will be familiar with, one of the largest companies in the world, have pledged to reduce their Scope 3 emissions per unit of revenue by 30% by 2030. And then, as I mentioned, there's an option to set targets that are physical intensity reduction targets that do not lead to absolute growth in emissions. So McDonald's, for example, has committed to reduce emissions per ton of food and packaging across the entire supply chain by 31% by 2030. And Royal DSM, a large chemical company, has committed to reduce emissions from the upstream goods services they buy, from transportation and distribution, and from the waste it generates in its operations by 28% per ton of product. And so those were the emission reduction targets. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to address these later. But there also is the option of setting supplier engagement targets. And the core piece here really is that companies commit to not engaging their suppliers or customers to set these targets, but they commit to having a certain percentage of their suppliers, either by emissions or by procurement spend, covered by science-based targets. And that means you could, for example, engage your suppliers and talk to them about the importance of setting science-based targets, and that you require them to set the targets. Or it means you could shift your procurement to suppliers that already have approved targets. And we're really seeing both of these practices playing out. And there's several supply chains where you can already see this happening. To give you an example, a lot of beverage companies have started setting science-based targets. So, for example, a lot of beer companies like AB InBev, Heineken, Carlsberg, Asahi, and they set these ambitious targets for their supply chains because a lot of the emissions are in the packaging. So within a year or a year and a half delay, what you started seeing was all the packaging manufacturers coming to the SBTi and setting these ambitious targets. So you can make this very explicit by saying our target is to get our suppliers to set science-based targets. In terms of the boundary, you can set them really for any relevant upstream or downstream categories. So I think it's a lot more common to set supplier targets. That is the most common practice. But there are some instances and some value chains in which customer targets make sense. One example for this are real estate companies that might rent out commercial properties to, for example, retailers, and then those emissions are counted in their Scope 3 from those shops, etc. And they can get their customers to set science-based targets to reduce those emissions in line with science. A key point to make is that the timeline for these targets are actually 5-year targets. So they're not 5 to 15-year targets, but the latest you can commit to getting to this point is 5 years from the year that you're setting your targets. And the ambition really is that companies should get their suppliers to set Scope 1 and 2 targets, but we recommend the inclusion of Scope 3 targets. And that is because when you count whether targets cover 2/3 of your Scope 3 boundary, you can only count those emissions that are covered. So if your supplier has most of their emissions that are associated with you in their upstream, you can only count these if they also set Scope 3 targets. So any targets that are covered, any emissions that are covered with a target, apologies, those you can count against the boundary. If they aren't covered with a target, then you cannot count them against the boundary. I guess that's quite intuitive, but I think it bears repeating. So how do you start calculating the scope of emissions now that we've gone through these different target options that the SBTi has? Key point really to make is that the SBTi aligns with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol accounting standards as developed by WRI and WBCSD. And there's a number of different documents that help you understand how you should account for Scope 3 emissions. If you're very new to the topic, I would actually recommend that you go to the one on the very right, the technical guidance for calculating Scope 3 emissions, because it's an easier starting point. It gives you a lot more practical information information about what it looks like to calculate a Scope 3 footprint. Ultimately, you should, of course, align with the accounting and reporting standard. But if you really just want to understand what it is that's required of you, I actually believe that the technical guidance is a good entry point. And we expect companies to align their accounting with these standards and highlight wherever they don't in their submission form. And the first step that is really a good way of getting started for a lot of companies is something called the Scope 3 Evaluator. And what this Scope 3 Evaluator tool that is freely available on the Quantis website, you can find the link below, or you can simply Google it. So if you need to conduct a Scope 3 screening to demonstrate whether or not you have 40% of emissions or more of your footprint from Scope 3, then this is a fantastic tool because it lets you take in a few hours high-level data from your business. Which sector are you in? What are your key activities? What are some of the financial indicators around it? And it gives you a first estimate of how large your Scope 3 emissions are. And again, it's free. It's easily available on the website. And it kind of gets you going on this journey around Scope 3 emissions. So highly recommend that if you haven't worked on Scope 3 yet, to just do this as a first step. To be very strategic about how you calculate the Scope 3 footprint. And the reason for this is that data quality has a huge implication on how you can track emission reductions to ultimately meet your target. And what I mean by that is that depending you calculate your emissions, the more easily you will be able to reflect improvements that your different interventions have on your Scope 3 emissions in your actual inventory. So when you do Scope 3 screening, you typically tend to use a lot of financial data. For example, the amount of money you spend on a specific commodity every year. So let's say you buy a lot of steel, sticking with the example of earlier. If you do Scope 3 screening, the technique you use is called EEIO, Environmentally Extended Input-Output Analysis. And what it basically does is it looks at the money that you spend, and it uses a quite generic emission factor that says, roughly speaking, in the world, a dollar spent on a ton of steel will reflect X tons of emissions. So that's a good way of getting you an estimate, but your challenge is that then you will only be able for emissions spending less money on steel. It doesn't even mean that necessarily if you buy less steel, your emissions will go down, because you might have a year in which the steel commodity price goes up, and suddenly your footprint will look like it's going up, although you are making improvements. So to just have control over what reflects in your inventory, you want to start building better data. And the way you want to do this is while reflecting on how you're planning to reduce your emissions in your Scope 3 footprint. The next step really after the Scope 3 screening is to do a hotspot analysis. Which areas of your value chain do you have the highest emissions? And then start feeding in higher quality data. So the next step, for example, with steel would be that you look at the volume, the tons of steel that you purchase every year, and apply a generic life cycle analysis emission factor. So there's these widely available emission factor databases, and they have, again, average factors. For an average ton of steel is going to have an emission impact of X. And then you're already safe from the price fluctuations. And you can start looking at, do I just want to use less steel? Is my strategy focused on being more efficient in how I use steel? Or is it focused on substituting steel for a different material? And if that is your strategy, you might already have all the data that you need. But your strategy might be a different one. Your strategy might be that you want to buy from a supplier that has a lower carbon intensity when developing, when producing steel. Or your strategy might be that you want to collaborate with your supplier and incentivize them to drive down the emissions that they produce when they produce steel. And for this to be reflected in your inventory, you obviously need better data than just a generic emission factor. You need to understand what is the specific emission factor of my supplier, ideally even on the factory level, and then understand how that compares to either other suppliers that you want to buy from, or how that factor can improve because your supplier is taking action, setting a science-based target, driving emission reductions, et cetera, et cetera. So this has huge implications for how much time and resources you invest into your Scope 3 footprinting. So really the key takeaway I want to give you is that be very smart and strategic about how you build your Scope 3 inventory and make sure that it aligns with your strategy of emission reductions, and only go so far in the data collection as you need to make sure that once you've set these targets, you can actually track the emission reductions. And one way to help you think about what your emission reduction strategy is referring to a document that the SBTi, together with some partners, developed. It's called Best Practices in Scope 3 Greenhouse Gas Management, Value Change in the Value Chain. And it doesn't give you a very detailed, specific guidance on driving down emissions. That's frankly impossible in one overarching document because all different businesses' value chains are so diverse. But what it does is it provides you a framework to start thinking about what are the different tools that I have to drive emission reductions in different categories. And then it helps you kind of map out a strategy that can then inform your greenhouse gas accounting strategy as well as your greenhouse gas emission reduction strategy. And it's really a powerful way for you to see what are different things that I can do. How does it align with my general strategy? How does it align with my corporate culture? Like how does my company usually engage with suppliers, for example? So I would really highly recommend that you have a look at this. It'll help you create this framework to judge which types of interventions are best. And finally, the last thing I will highlight is that we have a target simple Excel sheet, and we have a specific Scope 3 tag. So all of the methods that I talked about earlier, you can actually understand what the minimum requirements are in terms of emission reductions by using that spreadsheet and the specific tab that has all the quantitative thresholds and calculates the minimum targets for you. So I think I want to stop here, and I'm already apologizing to my colleagues for having taken a little bit more time than I was supposed to, but very happy to take any questions in the Q&A later. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Alex, for the wonderful presentation and taking us through the nitty-gritties of setting Scope 3 reduction targets under the SBT framework. Now, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Marathe, who would be talking about the journey of Mahindra Group over the path of Science-Based Targets Initiative. Mr. Marathe, over to you.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you, WWF, for giving me this opportunity to share the journey of Mahindra in science-based targets. Is my slides visible?
Yes, Anand, yes. Right. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the trigger point of Mahindra going to our science-based target was the executive chairman, Mr. Anand Mahindra, speaking at World Economic Forum way back in January 2018. And in that forum, he challenged the entire corporate world to set their emission reduction targets by adopting the methodology of science-based target. And he challenged the entire corporate world signed the commitment for SBT. And the target given was to reach around 500 companies by September 2018. And in January 2018, when he challenged the entire corporate world, the number of companies which were committed to SBT were somewhere around 250 numbers. We tried hard, all the corporate world tried hard. We could not achieve the target of reaching 500 companies by September 2018. We just shot off around 25 companies. We reached up to 475 companies. And I'm glad to inform you that the challenge what Mr. Mahindra gave to the entire corporate world till yesterday, as per the SBTi website, we have total 937 companies in the world are committed for setting their carbon emission reduction targets by using SBTi technology. And out of that, 45% of the companies, that is 420 companies, have got their targets approved. So this is the huge response given by the corporate world towards SBT and setting their emission reduction targets. So when Mr. Mahindra challenged the entire corporate world, we roll up our sleeves and start working within the group. From the chairman's desk, he wrote the letter to other corporates. We within Mahindra, being a sustainability function, we send a request letter to all the chief executive officers. You know, Mahindra is a federation. We have a subsidiaries over 150 within the group. We started interacting with all the functional heads of the companies, and we targeted the main companies which are bringing around, say, more than 90% revenue within the group. We are into sustainability reporting for the past 12 years. We have companies which are part of scope of reporting. The companies do have their sustainability roadmap in place. They have taken renewable energy targets. They have their emission reduction target in place. So we presented the status of emission reduction scenario to each and every CEO and the functional heads within the business. We build a confidence in the minds of CEO that if we formally commit to SBTi, we can definitely achieve it. We have also linked SBTi with our business goals. We have taken sustainability parameters in our balance scorecard. Sustainability parameters are the part of the goal sheet of the employees. So taking commitment to reduce carbon emissions by SBTi methodology, definitely it has got to connect with the business goals as well. And it has created a momentum within the entire group to achieve SBTi. As per the SBTi, there are around, say, 25 to 30 sectors where the companies can form. I don't know the exact number. Alex may be the right person to tell that number. But Mahindra being a federation, we have a footprint for SBTi in 10 sectors. As you know that Mahindra is known for manufacturing of the vehicles and the tractors. So in the automobiles and components sectors, we have around these companies like Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, Mahindra Heavy Engines Limited, Swaraj Engines, and a few of the international companies like Mana and Mahindra USA, who have committed for science-based target. In real estate sector, we have companies called Mahindra Livespace Developers Limited, who have a 100% green building portfolio in the business. And we have two special economic zones, Mahindra World City Jaipur and Mahindra World City Developers located at Chennai. In mining and metals, we have Mahindra Sanyo Special Steel Private Limited. I'm glad to inform you that Mahindra Sanyo Special Steel Private Limited was the first company in the India to committed for the science-based target and got their targets approved. And Alex was the main person who helped us, Mahindra Sanyo, to got their targets achieved. Then we have the Risolcon, the consulting and the professional services company, who have also got their targets approved. Then we have Tech Mahindra, Mahindra Sustain. In air freight and transportation, we have Mahindra Logistics, In hospitality, Mahindra Holidays and Resorts India Limited also committed and got their targets approved. Uh, Till now, SBTI has not come out with the assessment tool or the review tool for the financial services sector. But I'm glad to inform you that the company Mahindra and Mahindra Financial Services, they completed their emissions inventory and they have submitted their targets also to SBTI. SBTI has said that we are not ready with the financial tool, but primarily they have accepted the targets, but the formal approval will come once the tool will become ready for the financial services sector. We have a micro irrigation company named as Mahindra EPC Irrigation Limited. Just last month, we submitted the target for them as well. So overall, if you talk about Mahindra Group, we have 21 companies have committed for science-based target. And I'm happy to tell you that out of 21, 13 companies got their targets approved. Now the main work has been started, how we can achieve the targets. Why we are going and why the companies are going for science-based technology, for the science-based target achievement. Yes, definitely there is a business connect. I said earlier that we have the roadmap in place, we have the balance scorecard in place, and definitely there will be a operating cost reduction if you focus the emission reduction by implementing energy efficiency and adopting the renewable energy technology. When we tossed this idea within the group companies and for achieving the roadmap, it created a lot of innovation. The employees have given a lot of ideas to reduce the emissions within their operations. In a way, we are supporting the NDCs, that is nationally determined contributions. We have an NDC of improving our energy efficiency by 30 to 35% per output produced. We also have the second NDC of 40% generation of the power from the non-fossil fuels. So in a way, the companies which are committing to SBT, they are supporting the India's NDC as well. As you know that Mahindra has also committed to become carbon neutral by 2040. So I feel that SBT is a stepping stone to reach up to carbon neutrality. We also face a couple of challenges while convincing the CEOs, convincing the businesses while screening and monitoring our carbon emissions. The maturity level of the businesses within the group is very. We have more than 150 subsidiaries. The mature companies like say Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, Tech Mahindra, Mahindra Holidays, who have their sustainability roadmap in place, we could easily convince the business heads to go for the science-based target. But the smaller companies also came along with the matured companies and set their target because they saw the business connect, the business benefit, the cost reduction point of view for setting the science-based target. The main challenge was the scope 3 inventory. Alex just mentioned about the 15 categories of scope 3 emissions. As I mentioned, we are reporting our GHG emissions. We are reporting our sustainability performance for the past 11 years. And currently, we are working on the sustainability report for the 12th year. We have inventory in place. We were confident that scope 1 and scope 2 inventory, we will do it as it is. But the challenge was to complete the entire scope 3 inventory. We were monitoring the scope 3 emissions, but not covering all the categories. We were focusing on some selected categories of 6 to 7 categories like say business travel, employee commute, logistics part. But when we started the journey of science-based technology, the main challenge in front of us was to screen and the monitoring of the balanced scope 3 inventory. And successfully we did it as our results shows that the 13 companies got their targets approved, not only in scope 1 and 2, but also in scope 3. Another challenge was that we were not covering all the businesses, all the subsidiaries. within the scope of our sustainability. So for the few companies like Swaraj Engines Limited or the Gromax Agri Equipment Limited, who are also the tractor manufacturing company, we have to start at a scratch. We have to communicate to them. We have to enable them. What do you mean by sustainability and how it is, how the going for SBT will benefit to them. And within a 1.5 year of a span, we created their screening and inventory of scope 1, 2, 3, and we got their targets approved. Another challenge is the international companies. As of now, out of 21 companies, 4 international companies, Bristlecon, Mahindra USA, Mahindra Automotive North America, and Mahindra Australia. 4 companies have committed for SBT, and Bristlecon got their targets approved last year. We are working with the balance of 3 international companies, and I'm expecting that, and I'm confident that by this year end, we will get their targets approved by SBTi. As the 13 companies got the target approved, now this year goal of all the sustainability functions within the businesses is to set up a roadmap of how we are going to achieve the set targets. The target is being allotted to a company. The company has got different manufacturing plants. If I take an example of, say, automotive sector has got 7 manufacturing plants. Farm equipment sector has got another 8 manufacturing plants. So what we did, we segmented the targets received for the company as per the plant. And every plant has been given a target to set their emission reduction in a stipulated time. We are following the 3-way strategies: energy efficiency, renewable energy, and using the alternative strategies, particularly for the scope 3 emission reductions. We are targeting low emissions technology. We are improving energy productivity per unit produced year on year. We are aspiring for the green buildings within the factory premises. We have a renewable energy plan in place. We have adopted an option of solar. Both the options we have adopted, CAPEX as well as OPEX. We have wind installations in place. We are looking for a captive power plant, particularly in the renewable energy front also. And for the scope 3 reductions, we are closely working with our value chain. So how they can reduce the emissions at their end. We are closely working, our Mahindra Research Valley at R&D is working how the weight of the material can be reduced so that the emissions or the mileage of a vehicle can be improved. How we can shift to the virtual meetings to reduce our business travels. Use of e-vehicles for our pool vehicles and for the business travel as well. To reduce the inbound logistics, we have created a supplier park near our factory. We have given land. We have enabled to have the all the utilities available for our suppliers, so that the emissions arising because of the logistics will get minimized. We are also working on the collaborative logistics. Mahindra Logistics, being a subsidiary of Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, in their warehouse, they are storing the spare parts of Volkswagen. Even they are into the logistics of the Volkswagen. So how the collaborative logistics can be utilized, maybe the 2 companies within the same sector to reduce the emission reduction. I would like to share a couple of a few best practices we have adopted and we are planning to adopt to achieve the targets. The Climate Group is the company who have come out with their program called as EP100, which is said as doubling the energy productivity in the next 25 years. This program they launched in the year 2016, and I am happy to say that Mahindra and Mahindra Limited is the first company in the globe to go for the EP100 commitment. Following the parent company, the other companies like say Mahindra Holidays, Mahindra Vehicle Manufacturers, Mahindra Heavy Engines, Swaraj Engines also committed for the EP100. EP100 is nothing but doubling the energy productivity in the next 25 years. In a nutshell, if today I am using say 1 unit of energy to produce 1 vehicle. So I am committing to produce 2 vehicles in the same unit of energy. That is in the next 25 years. That is the commitment for EP100. Another program of the Climate Group is the RE100. I think everyone of you is aware of it. That is 100% renewable energy, 100% renewable scope 2, that is the electrical energy. So Mahindra Holidays, one of the subsidiary of Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, they have committed formally for RE100. The balance company, though they have not formally committed to RE100, but they have the renewable energy targets in place in their roadmap. I talked about the collaborative logistics. So we need to collaborate with the companies within the own sector to reduce the emissions. The classic example is the SHLC, that is the Sustainable Housing Leadership Consortium. 4 real estate companies, Mahindra Life Spaces, Tata Housing, Godrej Properties, and Shapoorji Pallonji, they came together and they are discussing about the best sustainable practices, how it can be implemented in the 4 real estate companies. They transparently share what are the emission reduction techniques they are using to reduce their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So the collaborative form of working with the companies will definitely help all the companies to reduce their carbon emissions and to achieve their science-based targets. Mahindra is a founder member of the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, and we have declared our carbon price as $10 per tons of CO2. So the fund available from the carbon pricing commitment, we are utilizing it for the carbon emission reduction. EESL, that is Energy Efficiency Services Limited. I think some of you have heard the name of the company. This is the company affiliated with the Ministry of Power, Government of India. Mahindra has engaged with EESL. In the photograph on the left-hand side, Mrs. Saurabh Kumar is the Managing Director of EESL at that time, and Dr. Pawan Goenka, Managing Director and CEO of Mahindra and Mahindra Limited. So we actively engage with EESL for adopting the low emission technologies. We have adopted their 4 programs. LED lighting was the first program, and almost all the manufacturing plants of auto and farm we have switched over to 100% light. We have not limited ourselves within our boundary, but we have taken these initiatives to our employees. We have taken these initiatives at our dealers. We have also taken these initiatives at our supply chains, and we enable the dealers, suppliers, and employees to go for the LED lighting at their operations. The second initiative which we engage with EESL is the energy efficient air conditioning system, and we went ahead for converting the window air conditioner, split air conditioner, as well as the air conditioner required for our operations to the energy efficient. The third initiative which we engaged with EESL was the energy efficient motors. So we have taken a massive program of replacing the old motors with the energy efficient motors, and that program is in place, and the program is giving the results to all the companies. This is the flagship program which is called as the Tri-Generation Project. This is the first program kind of it within India, and it is being going to commission at Kandivali in Mumbai in the state of Maharashtra. The installation is in process. For that, Mahindra has engaged with EESL, and it is a completely ESCO model. The entire investment will be done by EESL, and Mahindra will be giving the all the utilities as well as the place. And in that, we are going to install a gas engine where we will utilize the natural gas, and natural gas is the input, and we will produce the electricity out of the natural gas. The byproduct, that is the exhaust gas from the gas engine, we will use it for both the purpose, heating as well as cooling. We have the existing air conditioning system within our operations, and with the utilization of vapor absorption machineries, we will use the waste heat recovery for that, as well as the balance heat we will utilize for the hot water or the heating applications within the process. So these four flagship programs of EESL: LED lighting, energy efficiency motors, energy efficient air conditioning systems, and the tri-generation projects. These are our action planning to achieve our SBT targets. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions now. And if you have any questions, please do write to me. You can take my coordinates from WWF. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks for taking us through the journey of SBTs in Mahindra and also sharing the various initiatives that you're taking for meeting your science-based targets. We have very little time, and we would also like to brief you about the Science-Based Targets Initiative Incubator that has been launched by WWF and CDP India. And we would quickly run through the presentation. I will take you through some brief introduction of the incubator, and my colleagues from CDP India would join us to brief us about the offerings of the incubator, the technical offerings of the incubator. The Science-Based Targets Initiative overview for all of you. So internationally, we have more than 900 companies who formally committed to set the science-based targets, and more than 420 have got their targets approved. And in India, out of this number, we have 46 companies who have already signed up. And we'll go into the details a little later. And talking about the incubator, this initiative has been started with the vision of inculcating science-based target setting as a standard business practice amongst the businesses, so that it plays a major role in driving down the greenhouse gas emission reductions. Objectives for the incubator are to develop a business case for SBTs in India and also increase its awareness and uptake. And we are working on these objectives to recruit more and more companies in the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and also bridging the gaps between the understanding that they have on the initiative and providing them all the support that's required to set science-based targets. And so we are recruiting companies for SBTI and the SBTI incubator. Looking at the sectors, we are looking at Indian industries from high energy intensive sectors with high GHG emission footprint, and the companies who have not made any emission reduction commitments. So we are looking at cement, metals, automobile and engineering, pulp and paper, and also other segments like FMCG, textiles, retail, and others. Talking about the incubator, again, it's a joint collaboration, as I mentioned, between CDP India and WWF India. And the initiative is supported by the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. We are providing support to corporates for developing their SBTs, and we are hand-holding from the stage of signing up till the validation of targets. So the complete support is being provided by the two partners, and in the process, we are working on facilitating the reduction of GHG emissions. Talking about the offerings of the incubator, the value that we provide, one is we are conducting capacity building workshops and webinars like these, where we are taking you through the various nitty-gritties of the Science-Based Targets Initiative and how to go about setting the targets, choosing the right methodologies. So this webinar is also an example of creating that awareness. And this is the third webinar in series that we are conducting on the Scope 3 targets specifically. And we've already covered the target setting methodologies and the introduction of the science-based targets. And we'll continue to work on knowledge dissemination through similar interventions in the future as well. So we're also working on sharing the national and international best practices. We've prepared some case studies on the companies in India who have already set their science-based targets. They are available on our website and also the international website of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. They can be accessed. We will share the link in this presentation so that you can take a look at those case studies. We will also be conducting in-house trainings for companies to enhance their understanding of SBTI framework and the various available resources, which are helpful in setting the science-based targets. So that will be provided on a need basis. The companies who express interest to sign up for the initiative and need support are welcome to avail these services as well. We are having macro level technical resources and modules in SPTI, similar to the presentation that was presented by Alex, which gives you a deep dive into the various aspects of different segments of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the Scope 1 emissions, 2, 3, the target setting approaches, and also the validation process. And of course, we are providing entire secretariat support to all the companies for the administrative and the technical activities under the Science-Based Targets Initiative Incubator. Now I'll hand it over to my colleagues from CDP, Devayan and Rupa, who will take you through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Rupa. I'm from CDP India. I'll be giving you an overview of the Science Target Incubator deliverables. So not taking much time. So as you can see here, the technical assistance in Science Target Incubator will be provided under the 4 stages after the commitment. So first stage is Ghg Inventory Check, which is basically a quality check of the inventory, where we will work on understanding companies' organization boundary and Ghg profile, understanding their main source of Ghg emissions for Scope 1 and Scope 2 Ghg emissions, and in case if the company needs Scope 3 target, that is, if their emissions are more than 40%, so we will be evaluating the current Scope 3 categories, including the preparation of Scope Ghg emissions inventory as per the requirement of Science-Based Target Initiative. And we will be analyzing those Scope 3 categories, which will be included in the target setting boundary. The next stage is science-based target modeling and development. So in this stage, we'll be working with companies in selecting appropriate methodology for developing targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 Ghg emissions, and we'll be providing companies with the possible emission reduction target by modeling them as per the required ambition. In case of setting science-based target for Scope 3 emissions, we will be selecting categories under Scope 3 for developing the targets which are ambitious and can be achieved. The third stage is after the target modeling and development, we will work on supporting companies in submitting their target submission form for target validation. So in target validations, at target validation stage, we will be supporting companies in filling up information in the target submission form and making it ready for submission to Science-Based Target Initiative. So once the target submission form is submitted to the SBTI team, so there is a lot of back and forth communication that happens due to some of the technical queries that SBTI team has for the company. So in that case, we will be preparing response for queries to be submitted to Science-Based Target Initiative for the companies. And the last stage is the communication. So after the target validation stage, so there are 2 scenarios. Once the targets get validated, and the other is when they are not validated. So in case the targets are not validated for a company, we will restart the whole process from Ghg Inventory Check to SBT target modeling and development and target validation. And when the targets get validated, then we move on to the stage 4, which is assisting companies in preparing or developing communication materials in the form of a press release, blog post, highlighting their business leadership taken by the company via science-based target setting. So these are the 4 stages under which we will be supporting companies in setting their science-based targets. And please note here that when we say Ghg inventory check, we'll be doing the quality check of the inventory, not developing their Ghg inventories. So it's required by science-based target criteria that companies need to have their Ghg inventory in place before committing. So before committing to Science-Based Target Incubator here. So next slide, please. Yeah, so giving you a brief overview of the SBTI scenario in India. So currently India stands at the 5th position after France with 46 companies committed to Science-Based Target Initiative, and the first developing economy to have the highest number of companies committing to SBTI. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. One. Yeah. So this slide gives a kind of overview of the sectoral distribution of companies, like how vast the sectors are, like from highway emitting sectors like construction material to renewables to hospital, pharmacy and chemical sectors. So there are companies from many sectors committed to Science-Based Target Initiative, and we have recently got 2 commitments from ACC and Adani Green via our SBTI incubator. So this is a sectoral breakdown of the Indian companies. You can see here that maximum companies are from automobile and components. That is 7 companies, out of which 4 are have set their targets, followed by construction with 5 companies, and software and services, 5 companies each. And there are 5 companies from textile, apparel, luxury goods, which are basically mostly the supply chain companies of larger companies who have set their targets for supply chain for scope 3 emissions. So next slide, please. Yes. So here you can see that, as I said earlier, the 46 companies have committed to Science-Based Target Initiative, out of which 14 have got their targets approved. So these are the listed companies who have got their target approved. So recently approved targets are from Gromex Agri Equipment Limited and Mahindra Group. So next slide, please. Yes. So this is a kind of a motivational boost that we have got when SBTI was recognized by the Indian government. So here you can see at United Nations Climate Action Summit in 2019, Environment Minister mentioned science-based targets as part of best practice that companies are doing to reduce their emissions, which shows that there is a recognition by the government now that there is a concept based on SBTs, which the companies are using to reduce their emissions and contributing to meeting the NDCs of the country. So this is a very good representation and motivating force for SBTI and for corporates when government is giving a stand on science-based targets. Next slide, please. And thank you. So I would like to invite my colleague Debayan to take you through some of the case studies that we have prepared for Indian companies with validated science-based targets. Debayan, over to you.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Rupa and Varun, to give a brief about the Science-Based Target Incubator. And hello, everyone. So not taking much of your time, I will just try to take you through a few of the case studies that we have prepared on few of the companies that we are working along with on the Science-Based Target, especially for the PS sector companies, just to showcase what these companies are doing and how do they plan to achieve their Science-Based Target till their target year. So first we have Tech Mahindra. So Tech Mahindra has basically taken the absolute reduction target of reducing the scope 1 and the scope 2, and they have 2030 as well as 2050 target. So talking about the initiative, they have taken the initiative to reduce the emission across the scope, which include cutting the diesel usage in the company owned vehicles and also reducing the electricity wastage by purchasing the energy efficiency laptop. So the company has also taken, has also consumed 100% of solar energy they generated on site. Next slide, please. Hello. Yeah. So next we have Hindustan Zinc. So Hindustan Zinc is basically into mining of the precious metal. They also have an absolute target as well as the scope 3 target, since their scope 3 inventory was more than 40%. They are basically shifting their operations and moving towards the advanced low carbon energy saving. And also they are consuming 100% of the solar power they are generating. Next slide. Varun, next slide. Yeah. So third, we have Mahindra Sanyo. As Mr. Anand has mentioned about itself, so Mahindra Sanyo has a specialty of an Indian company that got its target approved. It was the first Indian company. So the initiative that it has taken over the time has been like energy efficiency improvement across their building by installing the motor sensors and so on. And lastly, we have Wipro. So basically what they have done is that they have on-site diesel generated electricity, which makes the scope 1 emission. And in scope 2, it is basically coming from the grid. So they have included the measures which include the rationalization and virtualization, replacing the motor and the drive, and improving their air conditioning system, procuring RE from the PPAs. So to reduce the scope 3, they have also improved the access to public transport for employees. And also they have taken a number of initiatives, which includes the launching of the carpooling mobile app. So these are just few of the initiatives that companies have taken, and we would be really happy to work with other companies. Thank you. That's from my side. Over to you, Varun.
Thanks, Rupa and Divine. I think we already delayed on the time and we've exceeded the time. I think we can just take one question each for Alex and Anand, and then we can wind up. And for all the remaining questions, we will try and get back to you over emails. Thank you. Asa, can you please post the questions?
Hi, sure, Varun. So the first question is from Mr. Anand. How did you calculate the emissions from the post-consumer usage of automobiles?
Yeah, absolutely. As Alex mentioned that the maximum emissions, that is the out of scope 3, particularly for an auto manufacturer, it will category 11, that is the product in use. And you know that we have an association called as ARAI, Automotive Research Association of India. And every auto manufacturing company, when they manufacture any of the engine of the vehicle, they need to get their emissions certified by the ARAI. So we have taken that as a baseline, and we have assumed a certain number of running hours and the life cycle of the entire vehicle. And from on that basis, we have calculated the scope 3 emissions of the product in use. And not just stop of calculating the emissions from the product in use, but Mahindra has entered into a vehicle recycling unit. We have come out with a business called as a Mahindra Zero. Zero means zero in Spanish. And near Noida, we have set up a plant where any vehicle, any make of vehicle, whether it is a four-wheeler, we have set up a unit over there where we are dismantling the entire vehicles and we are recycling the entire vehicles. So we have entered into that business also, so that it will reduce the scope 3 emissions after the product in use as from the LCA point of view. Hello.
Thanks, Mr. Anand. So there's one more question for you, if you can take that. So
Yeah.
how setting SBTs has been helpful in reducing the regulatory and reputational risk of the Mahindra Group?
Reducing what?
Reducing the regulatory and reputational risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulatory risk, if you talk about, as you know that we have moved to the BS6, and Mahindra is the first company who have produced the electrical vehicles. So now the regulations are changing for the auto companies. Today we have BS6. Tomorrow we may have the regulations of, say, EV also. There is electrical vehicles also in future. So going for the SBT, the momentum has set up within the organizations, and it will not help only to the Mahindras, but when we increase our portfolio of electrical vehicles, it will also help the other companies who have set up their SBT targets. If they switch over to the electrical vehicles, it will also help those companies to reduce their scope 3 emissions in business travels and the logistics part. Coming to your second questions, the reputation risk. As you know that Mahindra is committed for the sustainability over the decade. And since we are into the manufacture of automotive and tractors, which is the, we can say it's a pollution creating product. So we are committing ourselves to reduce the carbon emissions by implementing and by adopting the SBT target.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Anand. And due to the paucity of time, I think we'll have to stop here. We do have other questions, and Alex had to jump off for another call. Sorry for the delay in closing the webinar. And thank you, all of you, especially our panelists, Mr. Marathe, for joining us and sharing your full insights on the journey of Mahindra Group and also the various steps that are being taken to meet the science-based targets. We'll stay in touch, and of course, we'll be sharing the presentations, and we'll try and get back to you over with the responses to your queries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.